people be like, oh my God, I can't be there. Like, oh, someone's recording it. Like, oh, yeah, that's awesome. And I was like, oh my God, no. Yeah.
Where should we expect this film to be dropped?
That's up to the production team. I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, I guess now's a good time as any. So there are 4 poems that I have in the project that I didn't read here tonight. And Nathan has been so gracious as to decide to help me record an album. So there is an album for you.
Don't! You can't just drop
So now when Joseph says my album is fire, he will have an actual album.
Make sure you have an album on speed dial.
So what was the process of just picking the pieces that you were?
So I think total, I had 10 pieces in the project. I think total I had about 13 or 14 pieces written that I was deciding between. And honestly, it wasn't an easy process, I know that much. I mean, it's kind of like having to decide which one of the kids you love the most. Because, like, in total, my thesis is like 46 pages. And that's not including acknowledgments and title page and whatnot. And so I didn't want it to be like exceedingly large. So I decided to cap myself at 10. And so the process of deciding is I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit of everything. So like, it's about myself. And so I decided, the poems that I feel like are most pertinent in my life, in my mind right now, the ones I decided to go with, tips for a successful interracial relationship. And also the ways connected to I'm Not Down for the Brown. Because, I feel like, having them placed where they are, I'm Not Down for the Brown is the beginning, and tips for a successful interracial relationship is toward the end. And I feel like that placement is sort of like a story of me, not necessarily overcoming sexual racism, but learning how to cope with it. Oftentimes, one of the ways that oppressive binary systems have us sort of internalize this stuff is that, all white people, all black people are bad. It's like, obviously, we know that not all white people are racist, but it becomes a defense mechanism kind of thing. And so I feel like that kind of transition is sort of showing, him sort of breaking past that defense mechanism. And so other pieces I have in there, like Black Boys, I just sort of felt like I needed some sort of celebratory piece about, me and all Black boys. I talked earlier about, how communities aren't homogenous, or at least communities shouldn't be homogenous. And so, I tried to, mention as many different kinds of Black boys as I could. Not only just myself, but just, people I've met growing up, people I know now, people I will meet into the future. And so I guess my process of deciding which ones to include was just, trying to pick a little bit of everything. I feel like at some point in the future I might sort of write something that's all about one topic, but I feel like for this project I really need to do something that was as all-encompassing as possible.
I have a question. So a lot of what you shared was very intimate, and I wanted to ask how do you choose what parts of yourself you want to write out or share, and what parts that you want to kind of keep private?
So as a psychology major, I very much believe in the power of therapy. And so part of my writing process is therapeutic. I'd probably say a vast majority of my writing process is going to be therapeutic. And so a good example is I'm Not Down for the Brown. That's something that happened in my freshman year. I processed it, but I never really, I processed it internally, but I never really put it out there. So this was the first time I really put that out there for the world to see. And part of my decision in doing that specifically was that trying to show the world hey, this is something that happens. Y'all need to be aware of this. And so I guess the process of deciding what parts of myself to share, which not to, it really is just a matter of where I am and when I am. There are some things that are easier to deal with at certain times than others. A good example. I actually don't really talk about this much, but last summer when what happened to Sandra Bland happened, there was a point where in a week I probably got up 10 hours of sleep because I was waking up from recurring nightmares. And so I've never written about that because I'm not at a point yet where I can be able to express that both verbally and then be able to sort of share that with people. Francine, who had to leave early, Francine talks about spoken word poetry being a type of emotional stripping. So you're sort of making yourself vulnerable and sort of baring your soul to people. And I think one of the reasons too is I sort of write about skin so much is because obviously, like I'm black, skin is important, but also skin is like the one barrier you have to protect you from the world. And so when that skin is broken, it makes yourself even more vulnerable. Yes.
This question might be inappropriate, and on some level you might not want to answer this in front of a group of people, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Within context of like sexual art and art that addresses sexuality, most exhibits that I've been to usually feature something that's designed to kind of shock, especially in queer spaces, something meant to disrupt or shock or even so far as disturb or arouse the viewer or audience. And I'm thinking really specifically of Robert Mapplethorpe's photography series. And I'm kind of wondering if for this project, was there some censorship going on of, because the parts that address your sexuality seem to be more of a romantic kind of thing. And there was some discussion of, I think, sexuality, but I found myself wondering at the end if maybe you had intentionally left out some more, because also knowing you individually, I understand who you are as a person somewhat well, and so I have to wonder if was there intention in leaving out some things that might be considered vulgar or...
No, that's a good question. I definitely had some thoughts at one point about I should write like a poem about just fucking. And I say that because if any of you guys have seen the normal art or read the normal art, there's this one part in it where Ned says, in response to the AIDS epidemic happening, and people see us like gay men need to stop having sex, and then it's like you're asking people whose political identity is predicated upon fucking to stop doing the one thing that they do. And so I thought there was something really powerful about that, and I genuinely didn't think for a while that I could actually have something about, and it's not completed, but there's something in my notebook about like a sex poem basically. But I ultimately decided against it because more likely than not, my mom is going to want to read this. And it's not that I don't. Actually, one of the poems actually for this project is a poem titled "What My Mom Taught Me." It's about like my relationship with my mother and just all the things I've learned from watching her. Because my mom's never been the kind of person to like sit down and show you how to do this. But just I've learned things about life from watching her. Like I learned how to cook from like watching her growing up. But what was it on with that? I forget what was on with that. Yeah, my mom's gonna read this, and our relationship is improving, and actually it's really amazing. Because over winter break, we actually had a series of conversations. Like we had a conversation about child rearing, about parenthood, in which she to me used the word boyfriend, / partner. Now my siblings have kids, and I'm the youngest of 3. And I was joking to my mom, okay, yeah, I'm next. And she was like, what are you and your sibling? Or she's like, what are you and your partner or boyfriend or whatever considering raising kids? And I was like, have you graduated, Mom? But to me, that was such an important moment because that was like the first time that she's like really, truly to my face acknowledged my queerness. And then literally the next night, we had like a 15-minute conversation about having a sugar daddy. And so, like, yeah, I know, it's amazing. I'm sitting here in a car with my mom having a conversation about sugar daddies. And then later that week, she told me about like the first drag show she ever went to, which is a completely different conversation. But it happened like 2 weeks before I came home. So like, not only is my mom, trying to understand me more, but like she's putting in the effort because last spring break I had this really massive argument with my parents, and I'm not proud of it, but I cursed them out like a grown man. And I told my mom, I was like, you don't ever listen to me. Like you know me as your child, and you know me as like a member of the church, but you never bothered me to know who I am as a person. And that's what I was really thinking, like that's my mom trying to get to know me as a person. So I say all that to say I don't think my mom's ready to know me as that person yet. And so that's mainly like the chief reason why why I decided to leave out any sort of like overtly sexual poems. That being said, like, I mean, I have to prove that I'm working on, but as far as the beginning of this project, I decided against it mainly because I feel like if my family decides they want to read it, they don't want to read it, and I don't want to read that yet. So, yes.
So, first of all, fabulous.
Thank you.
Second of all, I'll just throw this question out here based on our previous discussion. It seems to me that there was a whole bunch of community in what you shared. And actually, just the word you just shared a moment, family, community, connection. So how do you, it's not about reconcile, but clearly I see in this Joseph, actually there was community in the sense of asking a community of fellow poets to join you, right? You didn't stand there alone, you stood there with your fellow poets. So how do you revisit that notion of community without boundaries?
I don't know, that's a really good question. So we had this conversation, I also had this conversation with Dr. Mann. So like when we started reading the post-structuralism stuff in my feminist theory class, it just sort of really like y'all, like post-structuralist writing will ruin your life. Like everything that I've sort of, a lot of what I have learned about social justice through the Women's and Gender Studies Department and through the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs and whatnot has been very heavily predicated upon identity politics. And then when we talk about, to a certain extent, you can't have community without any sort of shared identity. Like, I mean, even with student organizations on campus, there's an aspect of shared identity. Like feminism, like we're all feminists, that's why we're here. And so I think the concept of community without boundaries is entirely possible. I'm trying best to explain that. Like I feel like it's entirely possible within that community. I feel like it's entirely possible to have like a community like the Black community where we're not policing each other's blackness. Like having Black people police each other's blackness is a tool of white supremacy. Like having that's an idea of like there's one way to be this or there's one way to be that is a tool of domination and supremacy. Because like if we're doing it, they don't have to, so they can focus on other things like poisoning water and things like that. And so I think community without boundaries is entirely possible. I just don't think we're at a point yet where we can have that be a true reality. I think we're having those conversations. I think it's really important to have those conversations too. I mean, with the emergence of movements like Afro-punk, like the music festival that happens every year, we're sort of finally giving legitimacy to alternative blacknesses that were already existing. We just never recognized them as legitimate. And then, to an extent, I feel like you can't really have community without boundaries. You can't really have community with boundaries within group anyways. Like, queerness in and of itself is predicated upon being the margins of society. Like there's a certain extent, like I talk about queering my blackness, like there's a certain extent to which being Black, is queer in that being Black is existing on the margins of society. And so, like queers policing other queers, Black people policing, their own blackness and whatnot. I feel like we can have community without boundaries once that stops. But I feel like until that point, we're not going to be able to truly have a sense of community that's entirely shared. I mean, I think a good example is like, when you have hashtags on Twitter, like hashtag Thanksgiving with Black families. You have all these really funny memes, but you always have the people that are like, I don't get these memes because this wasn't my experience. Like Brandon and I shared an experience in that we both, were schooled in very white school systems and honors and advanced programs that were heavily white, and there was not very much Black culture in either of us growing up. And so we have that in a sense of shared community, and I'm sort of just now learning, my own Blackness and my own sense of community within Blackness. And that being said, it doesn't make me any less Black. Me not necessarily knowing, every single thing there is to know about living single or, the show Martin isn't going to save me if I get, pulled over at 2 a.m. for whatever reason. Having however many degrees I decide to get is not necessarily going to save me. So I feel like to a certain extent, until we can stop policing each other's identities within a group, community without boundaries isn't entirely possible.
So I want to second is fabulous. This is really a beautiful project.
Thank you.
In your introduction, I just have one quick question. This is kind of implicit in what you talked about at the beginning, but it should be explicit. In your introduction, you said that you did a poetry project, spoken word project, because it gave you more freedom and a wider range of tools. So I guess I just want you to talk about why a poetry project rather than a traditional review of the literature, sociological study, whatever, which an honors thesis easily could have been.
I think this probably actually wasn't a conscious decision, but now that I think about it, I think the concept of having that creative freedom is why I chose to do a creative project as opposed to doing a lit review or like a sociological study and things like that. So one of the things I've noticed about myself this semester, excuse me, I'm sorry. One of the things I noticed about myself this semester from having taken feminist theory classes is that when I'm writing papers or classes, like I'm starting to sound like a theorist. And I think poetry is really interesting in that no matter how many different styles you try to emulate, it's still going to sound like you. And then on top of that, you can go write the same poem 5 times and get 5 different poems. And then you give that same poem to 1,000 different people, and you get 1,000 different poems. You give it to them again, you get 1,000 new poems. And so I feel like part of the reason why I chose a poetry project is that it's, in a way, boundless, I feel like. There are ways in which you can use poetry to explain feelings and situations that you can't really capture with academic text. Like I said earlier, like that which is not named does not exist. And to a certain extent, language can only help us so much, but when you have more freedom in how your wording is structured, you have more freedom in how, like the words you can use, I feel like you can emulate or not emulate, like sort of get at the point better. For example, I feel like it wouldn't be appropriate for me to curse in a text in which I was writing, like something that's like based in sociology. Not to say that this work isn't based in sociology, but it's more acceptable, I guess you could say, for me to curse in a poem than it would be for me to curse in a paper. And that gets into another conversation about what is and isn't acceptable and respectability politics and all that kind of stuff. But that's a conversation we can totally have. We don't want to have it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 4, take 4.
Action.
Ooh, I love By Once. The Act 1 finale features choreography from her hit single, Irreplaceable. To the left, put everything you own in a box to the left.
Oh, I love that one.
Yes, wonderful. Now let's hear it. Formation.